Hey everyone, it's Michael Kikle. I hope you're doing well today, and I have a review here for the original Thrawn Trilogy of books. Many of you know Timothy Zahn is a very well-known Star Wars EU writer, creator, whatever. And even after Disney got rid of the entire expanded universe, they brought him in to make a new Thrawn Trilogy for their canon a few years back, and I've heard those books are good, but I have not read them. But I'm going to be talking about this original Thrawn Trilogy. But I wanted to let you know ahead of time, this is going to be spoiler-free. I'm going to tell you stuff from the general beginning of the first book, and that's about it. Maybe throw in some hints about things that happen for my personal taste in the second and third book, but I'm not really going to go into spoilers. I just don't think that's fair. Now, where do I even begin? It took me a long time, like years, to read all three of these books. Because I am one of the very few out there who absolutely hate it. Now, first and foremost, I gotta be honest with you, Timothy Zahn, and it's proven by what I read of him as an author online, he is a science fiction writer. And you may say to yourself, well, why does that matter? You know, if you haven't read these books, or even if you have. One of the biggest dislikes I have about this book, or this trilogy, for that matter, there's three books. There's Heir to the Empire, the middle book is Dark Force Rising, the final book is called The Last Command. These take place like 5 years after the original Return of the Jedi movie, and they were supposed to be the new, like, blockbuster trilogy, like a sequel trilogy, and a lot of people wanted this to be the sequel trilogy that Disney made, and not 7, 8, and 9 like we got. Probably would have been for the better, but I don't know, man, because I don't like this that much either. I have my complaints about Disney's sequel trilogy, but in some respects I like it more than this, in some respects I like this more than the sequel trilogy from Disney. I have a lot of complaints. For the people out there, just from the get-go, who say these are perfect, I think you're blinded by nostalgia. And for the people who are saying it's great who have just recently read it, like since Disney bought Star Wars and whatever, I think a lot of you are either really hardcore, just across-the-board sci-fi fans, which is nothing wrong with that, but I think that's what actually appeals to you. Either that or you're just trying to be on the hype train, which I think is a lot of the case, because you see a lot of posts of people that'll be like, I just read the Thrawn Trilogy for the first time. It was amazing. It blew my mind. Blah, blah, blah. I'm going to be honest with you again. I do not see the absolute obsession with these books and how it makes sense. I just don't. I see a couple of things I like in the first book, maybe a tad bit in part 3, and that's it for me. I think it is such a massive ball drop. Now, these were supposed to be the EU sequel trilogy, like I said, back in the day. It wasn't going to be cartoonish and have like a big, tall, alien green bunny. You know, it wasn't going to have a pirate ship in space. It wasn't going to be like that the way the Marvel comics were when the original Star Wars movies were coming out. It was supposed to tell a real, seriously told story. But Timothy Zahn, as I said a moment ago, is a sci-fi writer. He's not a fantasy writer. He's not really a science fantasy guy, which is what Star Wars leans more into. Taking Star Wars, which is more outlandish and fantastical and wondrous, and writing that sequel trilogy in this case as a regular old sci-fi story, in the vein of something like Star Trek, where the majority of the time people are standing around talking. It doesn't work. It never has worked. It doesn't work. It doesn't work at all for me. Even now, where I finally finished reading The Last Command, there is so much boring shit in this trilogy. This easily could have been a duology. And I think it wouldn't have been great, but I would have liked it more than what I like it now. Each of these books are almost 500 pages. I think the first one and the second one are a little closer to 400. But the final one is closer to 450, 500. Now, the thing for me is, my general interest in Star Wars will always be justified by Sith and Jedi stories. If they're not centered around that, if they're not centered around, on the other hand, Han, Luke, and Leia, or even Lando or Wedge or anybody like that, in the general sphere of people we know, or concepts I love, which needs to be Jedi versus Sith, that I'm not really into it. You know, that's just how I am with the comics, the movies, the books, all of it. And I think I've been proven this time and time again with how normies react to things like the Solo movie, including myself. I hate it. Rogue One, heavily flawed, really good. Really, really good. Now, a surprise to people like me who didn't think I would like that much. Kenobi, the novel from John Jackson Miller, phenomenal. Not really a Jedi versus Sith story, but it's at least about a Jedi, Kenobi in this case, which makes it super enthralling. It's a really great read if you haven't read that before. Way better than the Obi-Wan Kenobi TV show. So, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about Heir to the Empire. This is the kind of thing I tell you about that actually impressed me. It starts up with basically Luke Skywalker, at 5 years after Return of the Jedi, mind you, saying goodbye to Obi-Wan Kenobi's ghost. He's gone. He's not in this, which was kind of wild to me. Princess Leia is pregnant with a little boy and a little girl, twins, just like she and Luke were, named, Jada and Jason? Is that what they called? Jaden and Jason? I don't remember what the name are. I haven't read Legacy of the Force or any of the future books that involve them, so forgive me for that. But I will at some point, just not right now. And I won't review them as one big book like this, one big video trilogy or whatever, just because I don't think it's necessary for those. I'm just doing it for Thrawn because it was so boring. I don't want to go back and reread 1 and 2 to re-talk about Last Command now that I finally finished it. So I didn't. But the Han and Leia being parents now is such a sweet thing in all 3 of the books. I really like that. Leia is strong. Before she got pregnant, she was training with Luke a little bit in the Jedi arts. And eventually, we find out that the fallout of the Empire, after it was mainly destroyed on Endor, after the Emperor and Vader had been killed, basically, the Empire's not completely gone yet. It's actually completely converted to the command of a guy named Grand Admiral Thrawn, who was a blue-skinned, very slick, you could say suave, but more cold suave than hot suave, you know? He's a very calculated dude, and I absolutely fucking can't stand him. There are a lot of fans out there from the Disney canon and the Legends canon that love Thrawn. He's just a guy, you know? He's supposed to be this incredibly calculated dude who can study a species' artwork and make decisions based on a human being, in this case, I guess, with Luke and Leia and everybody being confronted by him at one point. He can make decisions on what they'll do strategically by studying fucking paintings and sculptures and whatever from their species. That is so adamantly stupid. It's the type of thing that I would expect Rey nowadays to be able to do in the Skywalker sequel trilogy or whatever. That sounds like some dumb shit they'd give her the ability to do. Thrawn is the ultimate, to me, Mary Sue. I cannot stand him. He just knows everything. The kind of leaps and bounds of logic that he makes, based on artwork, is fucking stupid. It is the most annoying, stupid shit I've ever seen in my life. I'm at a point in my life as a Star Wars fan that I think the times are over for good Star Wars. I just do. The comics constantly hit a wall over and over again, even under the newer ones from Disney. They started out really good, right? Like the Darth Vader series was really good. But they tend to hit bricks on the ground and in the wall over and over again. The novels have not been good, except for Dark Disciple under Disney canon. I've read a lot of them, like Lords of the Sith. I've read Heir to the Jedi. Probably the worst of all of those was Heir to the Jedi. But even in the old Legends canon, I read a lot of shit. Like, not impressive Star Wars books. But then there's things like Luke Skywalker in the Shadows of Mendor, or Kenobi, like I brought up a moment ago, that I think completely topple the Thrawn Trilogy 100% when it comes to the writing, the poetic nature of them, how they feel like an actual Star Wars book, how they expand the universe like the EU should, in a good way. These books may have been okay, the Thrawn Trilogy, I mean, when they came out, and I suspect a lot of the love for it comes from nostalgia, not actual quality within the books, because they're fucking boring. And what I mean by that, them being boring, is that a lot of it is introducing new characters, like a guy named Card, who has his whole little crew, one of them being Mara Jade, who used to be the Emperor's right-hand man back in the day. She even has some training in the Jedi arts, even though she doesn't have a lightsaber. Doesn't really use the Force all that much. But she apparently saw visions of Luke and Vader's final moments at the end of Return of the Jedi, so she hates Luke, you know? And of course, many people know she eventually becomes his wife later on, way past this trilogy, which is kind of cool. I was expecting a lot more out of Mara Jade. She annoys the shit out of me here. Card, her boss, them all being smugglers. The smuggler group that are like Card specifically as a character, that all gets on my nerves. Wedge Antilles, Luke Skywalker's best friend. He's in the series kinda. I think a lot more earlier on if I remember correctly, but in the third book he's kind of here and there. Not really the biggest Wedge fan, he's okay. But even he is not as interesting as what Luke, Leia, and Han are supposed to be to me. There's some good humorous moments, especially in the third book, of just trying to get like R2-D2 with his little legs to try to get through, swampy areas, kind of like Dagobah in Empire Strikes Back. Thorns and everything keep getting stuck up in his wheels. Great moment there if you haven't read the books. But Star Wars is typically focused on action and adventure, And I don't think the trilogy gets that at all. I really don't. I don't think there's enough adventure there. Some of the kind of nice sci-fi bits that are kind of interesting, they expand the world by saying there's these creatures called the Salamiri or the Salamari. I'm not sure how you pronounce that. They're creatures who that, when they're nearby, it basically makes the Force null and void, which makes no sense because the Force is supposed to be in all things and around all things. So they would have to be created with the Force, right? Like it's the essence of life, essentially. Doesn't make any sense how they could mutate somehow and just naturally be against that by evolution or something. I don't know. It's stupid. It's really stupid. But again, they're writing Star Wars like sci-fi. So I don't like that. I don't like Timothy Zahn's writing style at all. I find it dull and dreck. Just because you'll have characters in a room talking, and everyone repeats the same shit to each other. The conversations constantly are just way too long. You don't really have snappy conversations, even though I think that Timothy Zahn has a good ear for what Luke, Leia, and Han and Lando sound like, or even 3PO and R2-D2, even though you can't really write R2-D2. It's just kind of, you put the words chirping in there. But he does great with them. He does well with the actions of people like Chewbacca. It's Thrawn, his assistant Paleon, whatever his name is. And it's like the Nogri are an alien race that become very important from like book 2 onward. You have this whole urban legend thing called the Dark Force that shows up in book 2 that becomes a big plot point in part 2. And it is so tacked on to the overall story between 1 and 3 that book 2 shouldn't even exist. In my opinion, it should be completely eliminated from the storytelling, the complete trilogy. Dark Force Rising has such an awful middle book syndrome, it's embarrassing, And I wanted to love these books. I really did. I went into them open-minded. I'm a huge Star Wars fan. I love a lot of the cartoons. I love the comics for the Clone Wars era. That's really my favorite era a lot of the time. Big fan. I've read quite a few books, like I said, too. But this trilogy just feels so dull. And again, trying to make it too sci-fi makes it boring and slow. It feels like somebody who can't write action. When you get to the action set pieces, the majority of them are either shootouts or they're space things, like ships shooting at each other. And that is so dull to read. That has to be done visually on screen, in my personal opinion. And if you're going to have fights, and you have literally Luke Skywalker there with a lightsaber, he should be doing more. And I don't think they treat Luke with enough respect, and frankly, by the third book's ending, when they do something really cool with an opponent Luke has to fight, it's wasted. The stuff that should be given to Luke to have these great, shining, heroic moments are taken out from underneath him for no reason, just done to glorify other characters, and I don't like that at all. I think that sucks completely. Now, I talked about Thrawn. I talked about his assistant Paleon, who's fairly competent, but also kind of sheepish, but kind of aggressive with his own team, there's another person that comes along in the story, and I do want to talk about this. This may be a little bit too much of a spoiler, but I won't go into details about who this person is. There is an old wizard, dark Jedi, named Joris Kabath, or Kabaoth, Sabaoth, I don't know. Who gives a shit? He is such a badass villain. I may not know how to say the name, and I may say who gives a shit, but that villain is really good. Really, really good. And he knows when he kind of shows up on the scene and begins to work with Thrawn, he wants to take over the Empire entirely and basically be the new Emperor. But he's crazy. He's absolutely crazy, and that's what makes him really fun to watch. He doesn't show up with a lightsaber and everything. He's very much in the vein of how Palpatine was in the original trilogy. He can shoot lightning out of his fingers, all of that. But he's actually really smart, and he was a Jedi. There's so much more to that character that makes him so fascinating and creepy and bizarre. There's a lot of stuff involving the original Clone Wars that I think is really cool. Of course, not Clone Wars as you and I know it, but how it was discussed in the original trilogy for like a moment in A New Hope. But then also how it's developed within here is very different from what you and I know. With Anakin and Obi-Wan in that Clone War. But I really love Joris Kabath. He is a really great villain, and I wish we had more of him. I wish we had lightsaber fights with him, again, because my interest with Star Wars is Jedi and Sith fighting, or at least a really good Jedi or Sith character dealing with things, mainly taking care of them with their lightsabers. No matter how diplomatic or undiplomatic that may seem, that's how I want it done. Joris, in my opinion, is wasted so much in here. It's kind of sad, you know? But I wanted more of him. I wanted less Mara Jade after experiencing her in here and just not being impressed with her at all. Seeing how Thrawn is basically a Mary Sue. Paleon, his assistant, doesn't impress me. Card, the boss of the smugglers that Mara Jade works for, I don't like him either. You know, all these new characters don't impress me at all. And then they disrespect people like Admiral Akbar. Not as bad as The Last Jedi did, but in a way that I'm like, dude, what the fuck is happening here? I do not like the Thrawn trilogy. I think there are so many problems. There's so much just, again, standing around and talking and spaceship battles and stuff that just, they're so dull to read. If I heard this correctly from looking online, apparently Timothy Zahn is not impressed with his early work either anymore nowadays in recent years. Now, when they say early work online, I don't know if that means this trilogy or just things he did before this trilogy. Like he wrote like 13 sci-fi novels or something. I don't know. But I find his writing style so incredibly dull. I just don't think he knows how to write Star Wars, and I don't know if he was the right guy to take on this project. That's my personal opinion. Of course, Troy Denning is worse. I read Crucible. Believe me, Troy Denning is probably the worst of all of them. Haven't read a Kevin J. Anderson book, I don't think. I know that Drew Karpyshyn drops the ball consistently for me. Haven't read Karen Traviss books from the Legacy of the Force series, so I don't know about her either. But Timothy Zahn and Troy Denning are probably the absolute lowest level for me, because at least Drew Karpyshyn can write like an interesting thing here and there, you know? Some fights, that kind of thing. They have some cool concepts, even if their series typically drop off, or like the Revan book, for example. The ending sucked for the Revan Old Republic book. If you haven't read that, I'm sorry, dude. But I really wanted to love this. I tried my best to love it, and I just don't. It's a great example of the EU being such a hit-or-miss series. There are books that I dread getting to, even though I want to. I mainly focus on just the Jedi-centric books. Like, there's one that everybody says is horrible. I think it's called Shatterpoint with Mace Windu. I heard it's horrible. I still want to read it, because I love Mace Windu. He's one of my favorites ever. It's Sam Jackson, for God's sake. But this trilogy, it just rubbed me such the wrong way, dude, and I am so picky about where I'm going to go to next. Do I continue the Obi-Wan books? Do I pick up the Jedi Academy trilogy, which is the next one after this, from Anderson? I've heard it's horrendously bad, but I've also heard people who hate Timothy Zahn's trilogy like that trilogy more. Don't know how true that is, but that's what it felt like to me. I'm hoping that those guesses are right, and maybe I'll enjoy it. It'll make me look like a clown when I go in making videos like this and saying how bad I hate the Thrawn trilogy. but then end up liking that if I do. I don't know. But anyway, I don't really have anything else to say. I just hate this shit. I think the Thrawn Trilogy is the most overrated trilogy of books I've ever read in my life, and I can't place on whether it is these books are beloved because of nostalgia of when they came out. They were also 90s books too, so there's that. Or was it 80s? I'm pretty sure it was early 90s. I can't decide if that's the culprit here or if it's just that these books are being beloved by people who never read other books. Like, I love horror. My favorite writer of all time is probably either R.L. Stine or Jonathan Mayberry, who writes adult horror typically. He goes fantasy now too, but still, I like good prose, but I like when people can get a good balance on things. Mayberry would be a great guy to pick out to write another Star Wars movie with Jedi and Sith, or to write Star Wars books. He would kill it. He really would. He'd be perfect for it. But even so, I wanted to love this again, and I just fucking hate it. I hate all three books. The first one is more tolerable, but at the end of the day, 2 and 3 are so bad that anything book 1, Heir to the Empire, sets up, the other ones don't satisfy you. They just drop the ball, you know? It's really disappointing, especially with cool characters like Joruus C'baoth, whatever his name is. I wished I liked Thrawn more. I just don't. I heard in the Disney canon they make him even more sympathetic, whereas here he's just an outright villain. He's a bad guy, but I don't feel like he actually does anything. He just knows fucking everything. There could have been some kind of twist to say, hey, maybe he's tied into the Force somehow, some way he has that attachment to it. We don't even have that. You know, it's nothing like that, matter of fact. It just feels wasted. It's one of those things like Dark Empire, and the famous comic series, or infamous comic series for that matter, from Dark Horse Comics, where Luke Skywalker became evil to eventually take down a reincarnated Emperor Palpatine. Love the concept idea. The comics are awful. Everything from the art to the actual story. Maybe I'll talk about those one of these days, but I really don't want to reread all 3 of those stories again. They're shitty. They're so bad, dude. The comic adaptations of the Thrawn Trilogy are bad too, just in case you cared. I tried to read those years ago, and it was awful. It was awful. So anyway, don't read the Thrawn Trilogy if you're somebody like me who wants action in the sense of more Luke doing things, and not just people fucking talking non-goddamn stop. If that annoys you, you're gonna hate this. And if you're like me and you felt the way I felt, I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments down below about this trilogy, man, because, again, the love that it gets, I don't get it. I don't think there's a single video on YouTube. You might find a review here in Goodreads and stuff every once in a while, here and there, but you won't find reviews on YouTube where people have the nutsack to say they didn't like these books, or that they thought they were boring. So, that's just my opinion. Let me know if I'm wrong according to you, what you think down in the comments section down below. Are these good? Are these bad? What's your favorite Star Wars book or trilogy or series, era, whatever? I'd love to hear all that down below too. Thank you all for watching, guys. God bless you all. Catch you later, and goodbye.